Hello, I'm Esther Githu-Yuat. It's Monday, January 17th. This is Africa 54.
A New York community bids its final farewell to loved ones, family and friends who perished in an apartment fire. As the United States observes Martin Luther King Jr. Day, we'll explore how social justice issues continue to play a role in American politics. And a new album by South African artist Misaki recalls a mine massacre.
We begin our broadcast in West Africa. Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, the former Malian president who was ousted in a 2020 coup, died Sunday morning at the age of 76. State broadcaster ORTM announced the death of Ibrahim Boubacar Keita, who often was referred to by his initials IBK. Keita was elected Mali's president in 2013 during the first vote held after a 2012 coup, which followed mass discontent over the handling of the takeover of northern Mali by Islamists. Keita served as president until August 2020, when he was ousted in a coup led by Assimi Goïta. Leading up to the 2020 coup, large protests calling for Keita's resignation were a regular occurrence in Bamako. Keita was born in Koutiala, Mali in 1945, and prior to his presidency served as Prime Minister of Mali and President of the National Assembly. The Bronx, New York community is still in mourning on Monday as it said its last goodbyes on Sunday to loved ones who perished in an apartment building fire 1 week ago. 17 people died of smoke inhalation, 6 of them children. Many of the residents of the 19-floor building that caught fire were immigrants from Gambia. A mass funeral was held at the Islamic Cultural Center in the Bronx for 15 of the victims. Burial services were held for 2 children at a mosque in Harlem earlier last week. Several hundred people attended the service to pay their respects to the victims of New York City's deadliest fire in 3 decades. All 17 victims died of smoke inhalation while trying to exit down the stairwell of the building. New York officials say a faulty electrical space heater sparked the fire. The United Nations peacekeeping mission in Mali has grounded its flights amid discussions over sanctions that have shut air and land borders to the West African country. The Economic Community of West African States and the Regional Monetary Union sanctioned Mali last week after its interim government installed in the wake of coups in 2020 and 2021 proposed delayed planned elections by up to 4 years. MINUSMA has over 13,000 troops trying to contain violence in the north and center of Mali, where Islamist groups linked to Al-Qaeda and Islamic State carry out regular attacks on civilians, soldiers, and UN bases. The mission has recorded about 230 fatalities since 2013, making it the deadliest of the United Nations peacekeeping missions. Somalia's government spokesperson Mohammed Ibrahim Moualem was wounded on Sunday when a suicide bomber targeted his vehicle in Mogadishu. Soraya Ali has more.
Somalia's government spokesperson was wounded in a suicide bomb attack on Sunday, according to police and the national news agency. Al-Qaeda-linked militant group Al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack on Mohammed Ibrahim Moualem in the capital, Mogadishu. He was rushed to hospital and was reported to be in a stable condition. Sharmaki Mohammed Osman saw Moualem at the scene. He says the official had been hit by a lot of shrapnel and his right arm was injured, but was also conscious and asked to be taken to the hospital. Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble called the bombing an odious terrorist attack. Nasra Bashir Ali, state media special correspondent in Roble's office, tweeted that the bomber targeted Moualem as he was passing in his vehicle and that his injuries were not life-threatening.
That was Soraya Ali of Reuters reporting. Australia and New Zealand sent military surveillance flights to the isolated Pacific island nation of Tonga on Monday to assess the damage caused by a strong undersea volcanic eruption on Saturday. Clara Frank has more.
Officials say they have received reports of significant damage to shops and houses along the shorelines from Tongans using satellite phone service. New Zealand is sending planes with relief supplies in addition to the reconnaissance flights.
As you'll know, we've already had the Orion depart. Its arrival across the airspace surrounding Tonga is imminent, and we're of course preparing for the C-130 to also depart today in order to make drops of provisions to Tonga, regardless of what the airport situation is looking like.
Australia, which also sent a surveillance flight to Tonga, said it is closely watching with the authorities there in handling the situation.
We will be working closely with the government of Tonga, with Her Royal Highness, the High Commissioner of Tonga in Canberra, to ensure that we are able to deliver the sort of support that we provide to our Pacific family and our Pacific friends. This is a very challenging time. Communications are deeply, deeply affected by the events of the volcanic eruption.
Saturday's eruption of the Hunga Tonga Hunga Hapai volcano severely damaged the single undersea fiber optic cable that provides phone and internet service to the island. Repairs to the cable could take anywhere from 1 to 3 weeks. Clara Frank, Washington.
The United States is observing Martin Luther King Jr. Day on Monday, recognizing the Black American pastor internationally known as a symbol for civil rights. Laura Bowman reports on how social justice issues continue to play a central role in U.S. politics.
I want to say to the people of America and the nations of the world, we're on the move and no wave of racism can stop us.
Martin Luther King Jr.'s rise as a civil rights leader began in 1955 when he spearheaded the drive to desegregate public buses in the southern state of Alabama. He went on to lead peaceful national movements pushing for equal rights. In 1964, King won the Nobel Peace Prize, and that same year, U.S. President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, and the following year, the Voting Rights Act. The measures outlawed racial segregation in public places and discriminatory practices that kept blacks from voting.
I have a dream. My 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
This week, the U.S. Justice Department paid tribute to King in a virtual forum.
Dr. King has had a tremendous impact on all our lives, and his legacy of hope and his fierce commitment to justice and equality remain present in our day-to-day work at the Civil Rights Division.
Many civil rights leaders say King's struggle to secure equal voting rights remains painfully relevant today.
What Dr. King is saying, give us the ballot so that we can elect judges who will be just. Give us the ballot so that we can elect representatives who will carry our voice forward. Give us the ballot so that we can elect people who will understand what a criminal justice system is supposed to be.
Earlier this week, President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris paid their respects at the burial place of Martin Luther King Jr. in the U.S. state of Georgia, where Biden spoke about the ongoing national debate over voting rights.
It's not just here in Georgia. Last year alone, 19 states not proposed, but enacted 34 laws attacking voting rights. There were nearly 400 additional bills Republican members of state legislatures tried to pass. It's no longer about who gets to vote. It's about making it harder to vote. It's about who gets to count the vote and whether your vote counts at all.
Republicans reject Biden's criticisms, saying they seek to safeguard, not constrain voting in America. They also say they are alarmed over proposals to change Senate rules to pass a new national voting rights law without Republican support. Meantime, statues across the country that many associate with historical racism are coming down, such as this one of the Confederate General Thomas Stonewall Jackson.
That these symbols are bad for the community. And today, we've removed that hate, and now healing can happen.
And I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land.
King was assassinated in 1968, but decades later, his famous words still inspire many to keep working for racial justice, an issue that remains a central part of America's national dialogue. Laurel Bowman, VOA News, Washington.
South African university students are fighting mandates that require they be vaccinated against COVID-19 before returning to the classroom. Even students who have the vaccine and want others to get it are against the policy, and the students' union is threatening nationwide protests. Linda Giftash reports from Johannesburg.
Universities across South Africa are gearing up for a new school year as the country emerges from its fourth wave of the coronavirus pandemic. And COVID vaccines will be a prerequisite for many returning to campus. The South African Union of Students has warned protests of vaccine mandates are looming. At the University of Johannesburg, students say they're angry that they weren't consulted and claim the policies infringe on their constitutional rights to bodily integrity.
Students must go to vaccinate under their free will. There's no one who is in a bio bubble. So whether you are vaccinated or not, the moment you leave campus to do your grocery shopping or go anywhere else, you come across people who are vaccinated and who are not vaccinated.
Less than half of South African adults have been inoculated, and there's no national vaccine mandate in place. The reasons behind vaccine hesitancy are complex. Students say their decisions are made on personal preference, cultural and religious beliefs, despite there being no evidence such methods protect against COVID-19.
From the first wave, I've stuck to African home remedies. I haven't been hospitalized, I've never tested positive. And I think because that worked for me thus far, I will continue with that remedy. People who have vaccinated are said to have been protected from the virus, and they should find ease in that. They shouldn't be bothered by the fact that someone else is choosing to not vaccinate and exercise that right.
Vaccines do protect people, especially against severe disease. But one of the country's top doctors says unvaccinated people pose other risks beyond catching or spreading COVID-19.
They are much more likely to end up in hospital, in ICU, and to die of COVID-19. And ending up in hospital is not just a burden that individual assumes. It's a burden that is shared across society, both in terms of the funding of the healthcare system, as well as other impacts that materialize in that hospital when there's needing to start to cut back on, as an example, elective surgery because healthcare facilities are coming under pressure.
Which is why he's calling for tougher measures on those resisting the shots.
All choices come with consequences. And that's the whole point, is that a mandatory vaccination doesn't mean that we're going to tie you down or put you in prison if you choose not to be vaccinated. It should come with consequences, just like there are consequences to every other choice that one makes in life.
For unvaccinated students, it's losing access to campus. The University of Johannesburg said in a statement that exemptions will be considered on health or religious grounds. Exempt students will have to provide a negative COVID test each week. If they aren't granted an exemption, students fear what being barred from campus will mean about their future.
If I'm refusing to vaccinate because it goes against my will and whatever it is that I believe, and the institution wants to protect me, then we must find means to find common ground. If it means I have to go for testing every week, if it means I have to screen every 2 hours, then so be it. But means must be made. They can't take away my right to an education because I don't want to vaccinate.
The University of Johannesburg says students can always regain access to campus once they get their shot. Linda Giftash for VOA News, Johannesburg.
Would like to hear what you think about Africa 54. Join the discussion on Facebook. Our address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our broadcast live on Facebook. Please watch and share our show with your friends. Also, check out our headlines 24/7 on voaafrica.com. Still to come, as Omicron infections surge in the U.S., President Biden makes a huge announcement in the fight against COVID. But first, let's check in with Heidi Adams to see what's on tap on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
Be sure to join me for the next Straight Talk Africa as we reflect on the life and legacy of the late Archbishop Desmond Tutu. We'll speak to fellow anti-apartheid activist, the Reverend Ellen Busak, about their friendship and their last conversation. We'll also introduce you to the new African Union ambassador to the United States, Hilda Suka Mafudze, about her plans for the young people on the continent and in the diaspora. So join me, Heidi Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Welcome back to Africa 54. Research indicates the Omicron variant of the coronavirus spreads faster than its predecessors, and experts warn more mutations of the virus are likely. As Omicron infections surge in the United States, U.S. President Joe Biden promises his administration will purchase 1 billion test kits, and make them available free to all Americans, including high-quality masks. VOA's Arasha Basadi has more.
The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, that's the CDC, recently released updated guidance for masks to protect against the COVID-19 disease. Seen here at the Protective Healthcare Production Facility in Paterson, New Jersey, is the N95, considered the premier respirator for protection against the infection.
The purpose of vaccines, the most important job of vaccines, is to save your life and keep you out of the hospital. And by that measure, these vaccines and boosters are working and working well. Now, you will hear, as many people have already heard, about people who have cases that are mild or asymptomatic, people who test positive despite being vaccinated or boosted. But keep in mind, what is often being prevented there is a more severe infection.
Murthy added that data shows strong efficacy for vaccination despite a roughly 20% chance for infection in those who are both vaccinated and have received a booster shot. The Biden administration has faced criticism for not acquiring enough masks and tests as Omicron spreads through the country.
When Omicron came, it created an extraordinary increase in demand. It's why the U.S., the U.K., and other countries found themselves without as much testing as they needed. But we are pulling out the stops on testing.
Dr. Murthy says the administration oversaw an 8-fold increase in testing between December and January. Critics say it's simply not enough.
We've ordered too few testing kits, so our testing capacity has continued to lag behind each wave. It's too little and too late, but noteworthy for the next wave. We've ordered too few and too little treatments, and we don't have yet a global distribution and delivery plan for vaccines, so there's a lot that we can work on.
Former Trump Homeland Security Advisor Bossert adds that pandemic-weary Americans must remain vigilant.
Americans that are frustrated and giving up, I think they need to hear that a return to some rigor in our social distancing is necessary because our hospital beds, and more importantly, our hospital ICU beds, are filling up and in some states are completely full.
The World Health Organization recently reported 15 million new COVID-19 cases in 1 week, a 55% jump from earlier figures. The U.S. alone accounts for nearly 800,000 new infections each day. The CDC has yet to recommend nationwide usage of the N95 mask, but the Washington Post reports the agency is considering updated guidance. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
A flurry of security talks held in Europe aimed at diffusing the crisis over Russian troops massed at the border with Ukraine have ended with no breakthrough. U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan says Washington and its allies are now ready for any contingency to deal with Moscow's actions as Ukraine suffered a massive cyber attack on government websites overnight. VOA senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain reports.
A sweeping cyber attack briefly took down Ukraine's foreign ministry website and other government websites Friday, displaying a warning to Ukrainians. All information about you has become public. Be afraid and expect the worst. The White House says it has been briefed by Ukraine and is supporting Kyiv, but has yet to identify a culprit. Analysts say the cyber attack appears consistent with others committed by Russian actors at times of heightened tensions with Russia's neighbors and may be meant to intimidate. The White House also confirmed reports that the U.S. has intelligence that Russia is already preparing a so-called false flag operation, an attack against its own proxy forces in eastern Ukraine in order to justify another invasion of the country.
We have information that indicates Russia has already pre-positioned a group of operatives to conduct a false flag operation in eastern Ukraine. The operatives are trained in urban warfare and in using explosives to carry out acts of sabotage against Russia's own proxy forces.
Talks this week aimed at diffusing the border crisis did not produce a breakthrough. And Russia's defense ministry Friday released video showing Russian tanks and infantry carrying out firing drills near the city of Rostov-on-Don in southern Russia near Ukraine. On Thursday, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan sounded a resolute tone after the flurry of talks ended without a breakthrough.
The United States and our allies and partners are prepared for any contingency, any eventuality. We're prepared to keep moving forward down the diplomatic path in good faith, and we're prepared to respond if Russia acts. And beyond that, all we can do is get ready, and we are ready.
Russia says it did not hear any adequate answer to its demands that NATO promised to never admit Ukraine or any other former Soviet republics as new members. With border tensions unresolved, Michael Kimmich of the German Marshall Fund told VOA the U.S. must be ready for multiple scenarios.
It's not just diplomacy on the one hand and an outright war on the other. There are a lot of in-between scenarios as well. In some ways, the cyber attacks point us in that direction. So it's probably a dozen scenarios that the White House should be looking at, and I'm sure that they're taking a careful look at all of them.
Meanwhile, Senate Democrats have introduced legislation that would impose sanctions on top Russian officials and Russia's banking sector if Moscow invades Ukraine, as Democratic Senator Ben Cardin told VOA.
So this is a clear indication of congressional support for the strongest possible sanctions, including personal sanctions on the president of Russia, if in fact he further violates the sovereignty of Ukraine.
Senate Democrats say another Russian invasion of Ukraine would trigger war crimes and widespread human rights violations. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
South African artist Msaki's new album addresses the killing of dozens of striking workers at the Marikana platinum mine. David Doyle has more.
Fans describe her voice as angelic and peaceful. But Msaki's new album addresses one of the most violent episodes in South Africa's post-apartheid history. Platinum Heart Beating recalls the 2012 massacre of dozens of striking workers at the Marikana platinum mine.
Whose hands of blood? So Platinum Heart is a reference to the mineral, platinum, and I changed the ending of the word to add a B, which is, a question about the state, the emotional state of being, of numbness. And so, yeah, I merged those two words. And I think because the first song I wrote was Blood, Guns and Revolutions, which is about Marikana and the Platinum Belt, it seemed fitting to just mark that was the moment that got me creating in this way and moving towards making what is somewhat a protest and an album of protest and love songs. Yeah.
44 people were killed at Marikana in the most violent police crackdown since the end of white minority rule. For many South Africans, it seemed to dash hopes that the bloody repression of protests had been relegated to the country's apartheid past. Msaki's Afro-pop album, released at the end of last year, aims to capture the sadness and disappointment.
I think the thread that I'm trying to notice through my music is, even though I'm going through things that are painful, I like encouraging. I'd like to build on that intentionally, to write songs that, even if we're going down, we find a way to encourage each other to move forward.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. The 2022 Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas, Nevada was smaller because of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as usual, the event drew companies that are dreaming big. Maria Prus was among the journalists covering the event and has this report narrated by Anna Rice.
One of the most anticipated tech events of the year, CES, or Consumer Electronics Show 2022, took place in Las Vegas in early January. Over 2,000 participants came to the city to showcase their technological achievements.
Everybody from LG, Samsung, Sony.
But Microsoft, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Lenovo, General Motors, and some other giants decided it was unsafe to show up. Yet their spots were taken by small startups. A lot of attention was focused this year on the company called Zero G, whose technology allows people to feel zero gravity. A modified Boeing 727 flies at some 6 kilometers above the ground on special trajectories, allowing its passengers to float inside the cabin. Another important trend that has not changed over the past few years is automation and artificial intelligence, especially in the auto industry.
We have BMW, we have Amazon, we have new companies like a company called Too Simple who is doing self-driving freight trucks.
A number of companies at the expo presented innovations designed to help people simplify their lives and stay healthy.
Obviously, digital health has been, a tremendous growth area, especially in the last 2 years with the pandemic, with telemedicine and wearables and ways that, people can better monitor themselves.
The company called Esper Bionics, for example, produces high-tech prostheses. Some of the small startups at the expo this year offered high-tech solutions to environmental problems. One such example is EFA, a Ukrainian company that has for the last few years been producing unique disposable paper toothbrushes that are 100% recyclable.
We make disposable products that are environmentally friendly. Our first products were a disposable and 100% recyclable toothbrush and paper razor. Here at CES, we want to meet new clients and make sure our startup is known all around the world.
And this company, Never Dark, allows users to create a country house feel without leaving their apartment, thanks to their innovation, bio-fireplaces that produce no smoke but have real flames.
We've come to Las Vegas to present our product, a smart fireplace with a real flame that can be installed inside apartments. We're a little anxious as the first guests come in, but we're ready to light our fire and introduce it to America.
Usually over 170,000 people attend the CES expos. But this year, because of the pandemic, just over 40,000 showed up. But while the crowd was smaller, the ideas were just as big as always. For Maria Prus and Julie Tabo in Washington and Las Vegas, Anna Rice, VOA News.
Thank you for joining us on Africa 54. Goodbye.